Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and today we are going to do a variation on one of our classic and most popular webinars, writing a case study, and in this case, the Path Goal Leadership Edition. So we're going to explore a case study assignment. We're going to talk about the theory that is being integrated and applied here, and work on translating the process of looking at the assignment sheet to drafting an outline and ultimately writing a paper. I encourage questions as we go along. Please feel free to type in the chat room at any time. I might not get to your question immediately, but I will make sure to get to it before we're done. So a few preliminaries. Here at the ACU Online Writing Center, we are always happy to work with students at anywhere in the process. You could be dissertating, you could be just starting the program, and anywhere in between, and we're happy to work with you. I presume by the classes that you're taking that you've been at ACU before and taken more than one class. But in case you haven't used the Writing Center before, you can work with us at a number of different points, including in webinars such as this. You can go ahead and make appointments to send us papers through the WC Online system. Those are usually asynchronous appointments, meaning you upload your paper by the appointment time, we look at it, we send you feedback within 24 hours, and availability permitting, we also do phone or Zoom appointments where you can talk with us and ask questions in real time. Really depends on what you need and what we have available. We do try and accommodate requests, but it's helpful if you ask beforehand because we might need to juggle our schedule a little bit to accommodate something. We also have a growing body of sample papers, blog posts, and recordings of webinars such as this on the Writing Center website. The basic workflow is quite simple. You schedule an appointment through the WC Online system. By the appointment time, you upload your paper to Turnitin and through the Writing Center Canvas website. And then within 24 hours, you get an email from us with your feedback. Some webinars coming up that you might be interested in. We have a webinar specifically about how to appropriately credit, cite, and otherwise use your sources in APA 7th edition. And this is something that I do strongly recommend for people who are starting to work on a literature review assignment or on anything heading towards chapter 2 of your dissertation, because there's a lot of ways of talking about sources where it's easy to accidentally end up giving incorrect credit to ideas. So if you're looking at any of those, I do recommend attending that one. We have a variation on our normal live edit sessions coming up next Tuesday. So a normal live edit section, we're looking at dissertation chapters, but by student request, we are offering a paper review edition, which is to say you can log in on your lunch break, send me your draft, and you'll get the kind of feedback that you would if you come in and sat down in my office and asked for some feedback about how to make your paper better. We have a special session coming up on psychology reflection papers the Tuesday after that, followed by writing about quality improvement projects. That one's especially for the nursing students, but we have a couple other programs that you're working on similar, trying to improve something in the workplace. So that's a new offering that we have, strongly recommend it. And a webinar especially for our business students, writing the Leadership Assessment MBA edition, which will be on Tuesday, August 4th. If you are watching this is on the recording, or if you joined us late, there are many different programs that have case studies that you're discussing, whether we're talking the marriage and family program, nursing, or leadership. I have here links to a couple different ones. We are going to be looking at the first one, an assignment in the Leadership 711 class. Now, the basic principles for what we're talking about today will apply for any case study that you are writing, but the specific assignment that we're focusing on happens to be 711. If you are interested in a more general one or a specific course other than this, we have several recordings of that webinar available on our website, and you can view those recordings at any time. You will see me using an APA course paper template. And if you're wondering how to get that, you can just go to this URL. I will go ahead and type that in the chat window. It is a huge time saver because it does most of the formatting for you. And if you are working towards, say, your doctoral dissertation, it has built-in styles to allow your work to transfer easily. So I've gone ahead and typed that in the chat window. And also, if you have RSVP'd for the webinar, you will get a copy of the slide deck, which includes this link afterwards. If you didn't RSVP for this webinar, but you would like a copy of the slide deck anyway, not a problem. Just type your email address in the chat room and I will add you to the list that will go out tonight. So before we dive into the assignment, let's talk about path goal leadership theory. Now, those of you taking Leadership 711 will have done some work with this theory already, but let's just remind ourselves and agree on some common terminology for how to refer to this. So the key tenet of path goal leadership theory, sometimes called path goal theory, is that you should be matching the leadership style or behavior that you as a leader are using to the employee that you're trying to lead and the work environment that they're in. And the reason that you're doing this is to better achieve the goal that you've set out, whether that's completing a project, improving retention, or something else. It recognizes that people may have a natural style, but that to get the best results from an employee, that it is desirable to shift your leadership. And in any given team that you have, it may be practical and better for employee happiness and morale if you use the kind of leadership style that they want, that works best for them. And the four main styles as described are achievement-oriented leadership, directive leadership, participative leadership, and supportive leadership. Now, this is a point where I'd ask those of you in the room here today, is there a style that you yourself prefer to have other people use when they are working with you? Me, I really like directive leadership. I want to know exactly what someone wants done, including if it's figure it out, and then go and do my stuff. I'm not really looking for someone to come in and give lots of compliments and things like that. Supportive leadership is not something I seek out. Achievement-oriented, to me, that's not something I focus on. Participative, the sense that everyone's rolling up their sleeves together. You know, if I'm leading, I happen to like that. But as when I'm an employee and someone else is providing leadership, I just want to know, tell me what you want done, tell me if you have any preferences, and I'll get it done. I default towards a directive. So my question to you is, what would you prefer someone to be using when they are supervising you and giving you, leadership in whatever capacity it is, whether it is as a professor, as a mentor, as a supervisor? Please type in the chat room so I have an idea of the mix that we have here. So if the general goal of this style of, you're selecting the style of leadership is to match what you are doing, your practice as it were, to the employee in the work environment, what are some of the things that you should be considering? Well, we want to look at the employee themselves. What are their characteristics? It's rather like parenting. Some kids like a lot of praise, some don't. Some will tell you, "Mom, that's corny," or "Stop it, you're embarrassing me." And others will really thrive and do better. So we want to get to know the individual employee if it's a work situation, or in the case study that we will be looking at, the teacher-student relationship, we'd be looking at the students, the participants. We also want to look at the task. What does this require? Because if you have something where you're building something up and empowering someone by giving them more knowledge, that particular task may require something that ordinarily you just let them go and do your thing. But here, the task requires that you give them more information or more resources. Same thing with the environment. I'll give you an example from quarantine here. So in my other life, I run an opera company called Really Spicy Opera. I love it. We went to Paris and performed in January. and we got an invitation to perform at the French National Library and the Fondation des États-Unis, and that was great. Now, I speak French fluently. I've been to France a lot. Most of our team had not been to France before, and most of them did not speak more than the kind of level of French that goes with "where's the bathroom" and "how much," or "I want that." So although I would normally give these adults, professionals in their field, I'd normally give them just directive-based leadership for this task in this environment, being in a foreign country, and by wanting them to show up on time for rehearsal and stuff, I gave them a lot of support that I normally wouldn't have. And I also gave them participative leadership too, because some cases we was literally walking them from one place to another so that they knew how to get there. There was also a strike going on, so you couldn't just hop on the metro and get around by train. So it's more complicated than normal. So that's an example of how both the task and the environment drove choosing to practice different leadership styles than my default. We also want to focus on motivation and what is it that gets them inspired to do the things that they need to do or that you want them to do. How is that being defined? Is it defined in a way that they respect and appreciate? We want to clarify the path, the steps to get there, to remove obstacles if there are any. And in life, usually an obstacle will come up sooner or later. Often it is, oh, we need that sooner. Or, oh, we've had to trim the budget. You need to figure out how to do stuff without everything that you had expected and or agreed on beforehand. And also to provide support as necessary to enhance their motivation. I have found in years of touring around with musicians that if you do not feed them, they tend not to be very motivated. And also they may do things like deciding, it's too much of a bother now, and it's too expensive to do it. I will wait till this time to do it. And then you wonder, why is everyone hangry? Everyone's tempers are short and no one's paying attention. Oh, they're not eating again. So in that case, providing support was making sure that food and drink materialized or that we had a scheduled dinner after rehearsal. So make sure that you keep these things in mind. Personally, I've never found someone who wasn't motivated at least a little bit by free food and drink, but your mileage may vary. So at this point, we are going to shift to looking at some specific materials. So I'm going to be changing my screen sharing. And if you do not see the things that I am talking about, please let me know, because I sometimes have to restart the screen sharing. So at this point, you should now see my screen in Google Chrome. I'm sharing the Pathical Leadership assignment. So you should see at the top, Pathical Leadership Theory Case Study Analysis. Please let me know in the chat if you're not seeing this. So let's look at the basic parameters here. We have to write a 3 to 4 page analysis of the assigned case study. Okay. And need to use at least 2 peer-reviewed articles to support the analysis besides the text that we've been looking at. Okay. We also have to format the paper in APA. And if we go ahead and look down here, we see that there's not only a set of questions we're supposed to be answering, but some grading criteria that help us know what we're going to be looking at. I am going to zoom in just a little bit so that it's easier to read some of this. And we see we have 4 major questions. And one of the grading criteria here is paper is 3 to 4 pages. So someone asked an excellent question in the chat, which is, will you get points off if the 4 pages is exceeded because of the intro and conclusion? And I would say it's possible, so don't push it. Now that 3 to 4 pages is not talking about the cover sheet, and it's usually not talking about the reference page either. So that 3 to 4 pages is the body of the paper, generally speaking. And I believe that's been the case each time this class has been offered in the past. So 4 pages, double spaced, works out to be about 250 words per page. So we're talking a 750 to 1,000 word paper. So one of the reasons you want to make an outline before you do this is to make sure you get all the required points, points in the outline section, but also these points here, without going over or writing material that you don't need. So, okay, now you have to have 2 more articles, and it's possible you've done some reading already. But in case you haven't, you can go ahead and look in some place like Google Scholar and do a search, as I have here, for path goal theory of leadership. You can even limit it to, oh, I want to look at things from the last several years. And you could try and throw in things like teacher and see what that comes up. And you'll find that some of this involves principal-teacher relationships like this source here. And if you're looking for something with students involved, well, maybe we should stick in the word student. Now, you see that some of these things have links to PDF, so I can just grab the text. But if you are searching in the ACU library, I can do that exact same search here. And I can, if I select full text as one of my search options here, and I'll even go ahead and make this the last 5 years or so. Now, I'm not going to waste any of my time looking at any source that I can't read the whole thing if I want. So I could, for example, say, oh, students as stakeholders. That might be something relevant because we're talking about leadership in the classroom. Great. Can look and see, okay, well, nursing, not what we're doing right now. Might have something, but let's see if we can get something closer to it. Leadership in early years, all right, possibly. And so you're probably getting the idea by now that you can make this more specific. Now, if you make it too specific, like if I search for music, that's going to require a very targeted source, and you'll find that there's not a lot that deals specifically with music. Now, this is down to 11 choices, and if we really look around, you'll find that most of it isn't actually about leading a school orchestra. But there are many relevant choices out there. All right, so let us turn to the assignment instructions here. And you'll see that we have the description of the case. But before you read that, I recommend starting with these questions and seeing how that would lend itself to organizing your paper. So I'm going to do another sharing thing here. I'm going to go ahead and open up a copy of the AP course paper template that I have here. And I'm going to arrange it so that you should be able to see this screen and my web browser. So bear with me as I make this transition. And because of this, I'm not going to be looking at the chat directly. I'll check it periodically, but be aware that my screen will be showing. So this might not be the best time to send me a private question. I'll let you know when we get back to that point. Okay, so now you should see on the left hand the web browser with the assignment, and on the right hand you should see the course paper template. Please let me know if that's not the case. So I'm just going to start with the preliminaries here. Title of paper, well, this is going to be my path goal leadership. You can always come up with a fancier title later, but this is very accurate, descriptive, and it does the job. So Now, you could put in student, that's not really uh, helpful there. So I'm going to put an EdD program, and then you can fill in the rest of those details there. We are not having an abstract for this. This is not described in the assignment, so I'm just going to delete this whole page. And I'm going to go ahead and delete all these placeholders here. And to save myself a little typing, I'm going to copy and paste that here. All right, those are just preliminaries, taking care of those. So now I want to make sure that I have a list here for doing all the things I need to do. So I'm going to start with the very short description of the assignment, and I'm just going to paste it here, and I'm going to paste it as plain text. And then I'm going to go down and get these questions here. And I'm also going to paste this as plain text. Now, I can take this and start converting it into an outline, a plan for writing this paper. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a bulleted list and see, okay, so I have a number of different questions. So this is about the different orchestras. Here we have expectancy theory related stuff with its sub-questions. And also with expectancy, how would I advise her? And then there's one last prompt here. So that's if each of these high-level bullets ends up being a paragraph, would be a little bit long. But if we look at this, we see, okay, goals, obstacles, how does Martina help them? This is actually all about the background of the case study. This is before you are suggesting things. This is you're just describing the situation. So let's put this under here, and I'm going to indent all these. So I see, oh, these are going to be parts of that same paragraph. And based on this, I can start looking at it and saying, okay, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 main paragraphs. Probably have a intro to the assignment up here. And then a conclusion here. And that ends up being about 3.5 pages. So that's about right for this assignment. Now I can go ahead and look at this rubric here and see what else it says to do here. And some of that might be helpful for filling in details. Well, let's see. Let's look at this first one. It says, discusses the goals and obstacles of the students. Okay, we've got each of these here as a bullet item. Responses include at least 2 peer-reviewed sources and using relevant concepts. So I'm going to take this information here and add it here to my outline. Again, I am pasting it as just the text, so it doesn't affect the rest of the formatting. And that's a little note to myself to include that part when doing that section. All right, her effectiveness, change of leadership style, motivations. All right, that's basically covered there. And you can see each of these ones has include 2 peer-reviewed sources in there. Okay, competencies, advice for leadership improvement. So looking at this, I'm looking for where would it be helpful to have this? Well, provides advice, that would be this section, so that's covered. Her competencies. Well, it says discusses the competencies. Now this says asks the question why, but it doesn't actually say, although the rubric says, that I should be discussing those. So I'm just putting in that note saying discuss them or list them out. Now you can convert that into a sub-bullet like and say, okay, well, this has told me that I'm supposed to give a variety of layers to this answering why. I'm not just going to say, she is X. I need to list her competencies, say what she should do with those, and explain why that's effective for the situation. All right, now let's look at this one here. Determines the most effective orchestra. That is, I believe there's actually a typo here. If in doubt, email your professor to ask, but I believe there's a typo. I think that should be the orchestra the style will be most effective, determine the most effective style for your chosen orchestra, but if in doubt, ask your professor. And the rest is standard, make sure it's good quality, and especially make sure to do a spelling and grammar check before. It's always a shame to miss points on that. Okay, does anyone have any questions about the things that I've discussed so far? If not, we'll just keep going right through it. So how do you introduce the assignment? Now, at this point, I'm going to abstract things because, of course, I'm not going to write this paper for you. I'm going to address a fantasy variation on this case study. So the specific reasons and sources that I cite will not be the actual ones here, and you won't find these sources, but you'll get the idea. So, okay, introduction to the assignment. Well, we have the instructions here, analysis of the assigned case study. So I'm going to write about a different orchestra director here. We're going to call this one Martina Malgieva. In the assigned case study, Martina Malgieva is a longtime choral director who has recently been assigned to a new part of an Iowa school district due to a district reconsolidation. So now the reader knows I'm discussing a case study. They know it's about music. What else do I need to tell them? Well, all right, so let's set up the problem. We have the situation. We have, oh, there's an issue, and this is related to a change. She's new to these particular schools, and the issue is not getting the results. We could even say, what are the stakes here? Now, you'll see that there's actually a fair bit of overlap between background of the case study and intro to the assignment. And so one of those things to do is be aware if you are doing both in one place, and to make sure that it's clear that you are introducing the assignment before you get too far into describing the case study. And so now that I've set up the basic situation, and it's a good time for me to wrap this up with a thesis statement for the paper. There. Now, let's talk about wording a little bit, because this is another area where people frequently lose a few points. So in APA, there is a concept called anthropomorphization that is very much warned against. Anthropomorphization is a Greek term for when you attribute human qualities to something that is not human. The classic example in Greek mythology is when Narcissus falls in love with his reflection, and Pygmalion falls in love with his sculpture, and other things like that. Now, we do anthropomorphization in our daily life all the time. People will say things like, my car hates me, or the cloud was waiting for me to start raining. But we don't want to do it in paper because it confuses who did what. So it's all right to say this case study analyzes as and assesses, but makes recommendations. The person who's making the recommendations really is me. The case study is the format in which I've laid out the analysis. So in this case, if I just say includes recommendations, that's fine. That's no problem here. So in my outline, I've taken that note, introduced the assignment, and yeah, I've got a short paragraph that introduces what I have to do. Great. So I can move on to the next one and say, all right, well, I need to provide some background to the case study, including relevant concepts. So I'm not going to write all this out. What I am going to do is going to break this into sub-bullets where I know I need to say different things, like introduce path goal, now, it's not going to be the first thing I mentioned because we need to give some more background to the case studies here. So in my riff on the assignment here, I might include key details like the district superintendent threatening to cut the arts program because it's clearly not as popular as it used to be, and they need to invest more in STEM subjects. Fund the computer lab, use the orchestra room for athletics, things like that. All right, but if I look at this and say, okay, another sentence or two on that, introduce the theory, state why it's important. Now this becomes, this is kind of background for the assignment. And so this isn't actually something I have to write. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to cross that out and see what are the goals in this and relate that to path goal leadership. And just reword this as a statement. You see, by taking the wording for the prompt here, we have the basic setup for our sentences here. Martina helps them address by. Now, I'm not saying use just this wording. That will get very boring because the prompts are written for simplicity of reading. But you get the idea of that's the key information that I need to state. I can always, once I have it down, these are the things I need to say. I can always write a nicer sentence later. Now, do remember that it does say that I should be using at least 2 peer-reviewed sources. So probably here for leadership goal theory, I'll be citing Nordhaus. And this will probably include something. And that way, when you go to do your reading for those other sources, you know, oh, I need to slot in these other sources there because I need to make sure I have that variety there. And when you know what you're looking for, it's a lot easier to spot it when you're reading through those other sources. So you can go ahead and do that with these other ones here. But as you can see, this tells me exactly what I need to be discussing in this paragraph here. And it makes sure that I will be adding the specifics mentioned in the rubric to make sure I get all the points. So that's good. It also means that if I'm interrupted, you know, if someone calls on the phone, I have to go pick up the kids from the doctor or from school, need to go grocery shopping in the middle. When I sit down, my outline tells me exactly what to fill in. Oh, I need to describe what students' goals are. Oh, I need to list some of the obstacles for that. And then when you go through the case study and you see, oh, some of them are becoming disinterested. All right, well, slot that into your outline. Now let's talk a little bit about this prompt here. For which of the 3 orchestras do you think the style would be most effective? Now, there are a couple ways that you could go about trying to answer something like this, but you want to make sure that you are grounding it in the reading, in the case study description that's being provided to you. Now, we have these 3 orchestras in this case study, and I'm leaving my earlier example for Martina Maljeva to the side for a little bit. So we have the high school orchestra is very small. We have lots of kids at the elementary school. We've got fewer than that along the way. Okay, so let's see what she's doing. And it says, unfortunately, what she's doing does not seem to have any impact on the students. So even though this is near the bottom, I'm like, oh, I remember supposed to be listing things about what's not working. So I can go and see, okay, that's a mismatch of leadership styles. Oh-ho. So I was talking earlier about how she needs to help them reach their goals. So there are a couple different places where I can introduce this. As I can introduce it as a contrasting thing here. Okay, she changed her leadership style for those people and introduced, okay, but it is not working with the high schoolers. And that gives us a natural bridge to this one here. Now, those of you who have gotten paper feedback from me know that I very much emphasize the importance of connections and through things called logical bridges and transition statements. Now, this is a natural point to talk about how those authors might mention that you have to be flexible about the leadership style, because as you recall, it's about picking your style according to the needs of the followers, or the students in this case, rather than the preferences of the leader. Okay, we have been going for 40 minutes here, and I wanted to ask, does anyone have any questions about things that I've been talking about so far? Anything that I passed over too quickly, where you're wondering, wait, where did he get that template? Or how do I do that thing in the library? If you do have a question, please type it in the chat room. Otherwise, I will keep going and just feel free to ask. All right, so looking back at this rubric here, paper discussed the goals and obstacles of the students in case 6.3, as well as their contributions using relevant concepts and examples of the practical leadership theory. So that making sure to use the relevant concepts and examples. So this first one is about practical leadership theory. This is going to be about expectancy theory. So that means that when we're discussing these, we should include an explanation of that aspect of expectancy theory. It doesn't need to be, here's what the theory states, but what the relevant portions here. For example, now I don't need to know the exact reason when I'm writing this outline, but it does tell me in this rubric, oh, I need to be doing that. And this is a natural place to do it, to say, oh, she changed this, and let me explain why that worked. And that naturally leads us into, but it's not working for this other group. So let's dive in and discuss that in more detail here. So someone asked a question about logical bridges and transitions. Sure. So logical bridges are words or phrases that connect at different parts of your argument. You can see one of these here, the word however. However tells the reader, oh, that thing I mentioned before, well, here's something that runs contrary to that. So if the thing before is, Martina found a way to work with these two groups, however, they're not working with the next group. That tells us, oh, yes, but here's this issue. So however is a very common logical bridge. Another one that you might run into or use is as a result, which says because of that thing, this other thing happened. As a result shows causality. It's similar to using because. Because is a kind of logical bridge that you should mostly be using inside of a sentence. In this case, the high school students are not motivated to sign up for orchestra because, and then reasons. And it helps walk your reader through because it tells them exactly how these pieces of information connect. Now, if you're doing a summary, like in the conclusion, you might be using something like, as a result, or because of these things. And again, the goal is to walk your reader through so that they don't need to think about how these sentences fit together, how the information connects. You've laid it out for them. If you ever get feedback from a professor saying poor flow or hard to read or disorganized, it's usually because you're either missing a topic sentence or you're missing logical bridges in the middle to guide the reader from one sentence to another. Let's look at this outline because I bet we can find a couple more instances where that would be helpful to have. There's an excellent question that someone asked. Is it okay to start the conclusion with in conclusion or to conclude? Well, the question is not, can you do it, but does it get you anything? Now, if you have a separate section marked with a heading, for example, if I used a section heading here, an APA level 1 section heading here. Starting out the first paragraph with "in conclusion, comma," isn't really saying anything that we're not getting from the fact of, oh, there's a heading saying this is the conclusion. So most of the time writing in APA style, you wouldn't want to include that. There are other ways to indicate it, like this heading here. But here, it's probably going to be just some summative sentence like, so let's give us a big picture. Okay. Now, there is a variant that would be helpful. Like if we're trying to highlight this is wrapping up the case study or wrapping up the case study analysis. Yes, in that case, it would be appropriate to have in this case study again, because that tells the reader we're stepping back. And that is not duplicating what the heading conclusion is telling us. It's giving us a new piece of perspective of, oh, I'm stepping back for this conclusion and I'm talking about everything as a whole. So I wouldn't say use in conclusion, but if you're concluding a paper that happens to be of a case study, saying in this case study is not a bad thing. Because you could also alternatively have been starting this with ethical leadership theory, a useful tool for, which would be putting the emphasis more on the theory. And I'm not saying you can't do that, but because this whole paper is supposed to be analyzing the case study specifically, I think that emphasis would be better placed on, we're talking about the case study as a whole. And if you're going to include that, then it's probably going to be in the middle of that paragraph. Excellent question. Now, one of the things that students sometimes do when they're working off an outline for this is that they start writing it and they fill things in and they say, oh my gosh, I've just looked at the word count and I'm over. Well, remember, you've got stuff in your outline that you put there as reminders that you don't need. So here, I can go ahead and say, well, all right, I had this so I knew everything that I had to do when I got started, but I'm not going to turn the paper into this. So I'm going to delete this, and boom, I go from 710 words down to 677. So before freaking out about the word count, make sure you delete instructions like that, and take out pieces like this from the outline, but also don't panic. So the hardest step is to get the ideas on paper. An outline makes this much easier and much faster. But once you have the outline, the details down in your outline, you can go through and refine them and see, is this something that I've said before or that I go into more detail later, and so I can cut one of these so there's not an unnecessary repetition? Is there a way that I can say this more concisely? For example, here, this sentence here. Does it necessarily need to name the specific school she was at before? Well, if I don't discuss that below, no, because clearly it wasn't important enough for me to discuss it in the rest of the paper. So you can go through and take things out like that. APA style emphasizes conciseness and directness, and some of the easiest and most elegant ways of doing that is to remove unessential details, not because they're incorrect, but because they distract from where you want the reader's focus to be. Also, you can see anything like here that I crossed out because I was editing the copy and paste to get to the point. You can also go ahead and delete those once you've done that, because they're not going to be in the final paper. It was just part of the process of building your outline. Any other questions? One more thing we'll talk about before we wrap up. So let's look at prompt number 3. It says, Martina's competencies as a musician do not seem to help her with the students who are becoming disinterested in the orchestra. So that's referring to a part up here. Because she is highly trained herself, Martina likes to show students advanced techniques and give them challenging music to play. She spends hours listening to each student play, providing individualized feedback that, unfortunately, in many cases, doesn't seem to have any impact on the students. So, what is a competency and what is an activity? Now, this is getting back to one of the things on the slide, so we'll actually jump back to the slide deck in a moment. But if we look at this on its face, she likes to show students advanced techniques. Is that a competency? Well, her ability to play it is, yes. So it's getting to, she is highly trained herself as a performer and to an extent a teacher as well, but less skilled with this particular branch. Let's go back to those slides now. So we have our 4 styles here: achievement-oriented, directive, participative, supportive. So my suggestion is to ask yourself, okay, how is she thinking about things? What leadership style is she using when she listens to the students and is playing and gives feedback? And then we go down to the environmental characteristics. Okay, they're in high school. Focus on motivation. What are the goals she set for them versus the goals they want or are invested in? How can we clarify the student's path to achieving those goals? What obstacles is Martina providing? What obstacles are just there in general? And is what she is doing providing support that these students need versus things they don't want? I'm reminded of a story of a good friend of mine whose boyfriend knew that she was stressed, and so he showed up with sushi. Now, I think the reaction he was expecting was something like, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you. Thank you. Please sit down. Let's talk. I feel better now that you're here." I can tell you that is not what happened. What happened, because I was working with my friend on planning her graduate school applications, is she said, "Oh, you shouldn't have. Thank you." And she took the sushi and said, "I have to work. I'll call you later." So he was trying to provide support based on what he wanted. It was not what she wanted. And in most of these leadership things, it's tempting to start writing these up as saying, so-and-so is a bad leader because they're not doing this. But let's treat it more constructively, as we would like other people to be constructive in our romantic foibles, and say, oh, there's a mismatch here. To get the results, or the best way to get the results, is to change this thing. And although in this case, Martina is an imagined person for us, if you approach it in the guise of, this is something that I would actually tell someone to do, it just makes it a lot easier to write the paper because you're not worried about being nasty. And also it's actually much more concise because you're focused on, oh, problem, solution. And you don't need to weigh in with things like, unfortunately, other people can add that on their own. Have another question. Is it okay if the apply paragraph at the beginning of the paper is 2 paragraphs before you begin the synthesis? So, excellent question. And now let me jump back to the outline here. So when you are introducing the case study here, you will probably not be doing much synthesis because this is laying out, okay, here are the facts. And there will be a little bit of analysis where you say, okay, so that thing, according to this theory, is blah. Where you get into the synthesis, synthesis is where you combine information to make new meanings. That's going to be much more down here. So I'm not saying you can't have synthesis earlier, but generally speaking, and the synthesis, you have to have that presentation of information first before you're really telling the reader something new where you're generating new meaning. I hope I've answered that question. Let's see, other things about that. So places where synthesis would be helpful. Well, in this case, is why is she effective? So this would be a place where you will be adding logical bridges to help show that you are adding synthesis. So this was effective because is functioning as a logical bridge. Alternate phrasing for the same thing, same sort of meaning, could be as a result. Now, I would say use this was effective because, in this case, because you're specifically talking about how that was effective leadership, and having that word there helps make it clear to the reader. Other logical bridges of that sort, you might see, this is important because you might see a, on the contrary, although that's a little bit less formal. You might see consequently, which is functionally very similar to as a result. And the goal, oh yes, other logical bridges, two important ones I forgot. For example, comma. So when you have a statement like this, why do both of these groups seem motivated to play for her? So if you just answer that directly and you say, they like her. And well, your reader can take your word for that, but it'll be a better argument if you include evidence towards that. And that's where you use a logical bridge like, for example, to say, oh, I am giving you evidence for this. And writing out, for example, takes less space than writing out some evidence for this is that. So it's not that you can't write it that way, but it's 4 words and it's kind of clunky. If you just say, for example, everyone immediately knows what you're talking about. We are almost at the end of our time here. Any last questions before we break? Okay, so clarification, asking about the paragraph at the beginning of the paper. Okay, so in the very introduction paragraph, you probably don't want to be applying the theories. You could have a statement or two that lays out, I'm going to discuss this theory, but think of the introductory paragraph as more an outline saying, this is what I'm going to talk about in the paper. Here's the basic scenario. Here's the kinds of things I'm going to talk about, practical leadership theory, this specific case study. So the opening paragraph in a paper of this length orients the reader, tells them, here are the main things I'm going to talk about in the order I'm going to talk about them, and perhaps a sentence on why I'm going to talk about that. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for coming. I did see that someone included their email address earlier, so I will make sure to add you to the list of recipients. And if anyone else wants to add their email address to make sure they get a copy of the slide deck, now's a great time. All right, have a great day, everyone. I'll leave this open for another minute or so to catch any last minute email addresses, but this concludes our webinar for today.